Okay, there we are. Welcome, Andrew
Good. Well,
Chevallier.
nice to be here.
Um, so, just to kick us off, what's kind of present for you today, right now? What's kind of been in your world, on your mind, in your heart? What's today for you?
Um, well, I suppose the morning was making up a whole range of medicines for patients. I'm not I'm very happy not to be frantically busy, but I still have quite a lot of patients, and um, by and large, in fact, one of the patients I just realised it's 25 years that I've been treating her on and off. So I know their problems fairly well, and quite a lot of the time I'm repeating prescriptions that they have because they're quite settled with them and they do well with with them, and they let me know when they need a repeat. And this afternoon, extraordinarily, I have a very fortunate to have a very large garden. I've got 3 sheep on it at the moment, which are not mine, so it's wonderful. I get all the pleasure from them, but none of the responsibility. And they are Swiss Black Valet sheep, and they are huge.
Mhm.
Roman, the ram, weighs 125 kilos,
Wow.
and you wouldn't want to pick a fight with him. He's a very gentle soul. And I was digging up my carrots and giving them the clippings of the leaves, which they were happy to munch on.
So, are they keeping the grass down? Is that the idea?
They are that, but what they really like is eating the tree leaves. It's
Yeah.
been quite interesting.
Mm.
Um, they really like sweet chestnut, beech, oak, and hazel. Oh, and ash, and they really like ivy. And they're not so keen on some of the others. But they'll come running across the paddock, and if you bring them an armful of fresh leaves.
Yeah, it's interesting when livestock get near trees because they really do, they do know what they want and what they like. And I often think if they were roaming free, they would be just self-medicating, wouldn't they? In that
Well,
way.
the woman who owns them is our neighbour, who lives literally just down next door. She had them on a farm down the road, and they clearly had digestive problems, and they were getting a lot of bloating and diarrhea. And I said, well, I think what you should do is give them oak leaves, because oak is it's one of the bark is one of the most astringent things on the planet, and oak leaves likewise are very astringent. Um, and they absolutely loved it, and within 24 hours they were back to normal. So whether that was the oak or not, but it's quite likely it was.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, I think in some of these rewilding projects that are going on, where the animals can just wander around and get at whatever they want, I think their health seems to be a lot better, and there's none of the need for the medicines or the kind of
Absolutely.
pharmaceuticals. It's
Well,
kind of obvious, really, but it's we've come so far, haven't we? That
we had this vision that cows should be in a field
yeah,
eating grass, and I have to tell you this story that I come out with repeatedly, because I was on holiday in Portugal about 20 years ago, and I don't normally do it, but in Portugal it's beautiful food, so I had wine for lunch, with lunch, and was sleepy afterwards, and it was a nice sunny afternoon, so we lay down in this meadow, and I actually went to sleep, and I got woken up by this cow snuffling me. I think it was probably concerned that I might be, ill or something. Anyway, as I woke up, it backed off, and was, wasn't a problem. But out of my corner of my eye, as I started to get up, I noticed the diversity of this meadow,
Mm.
and I now I can't believe it, but I counted 49 different species of plants within a square foot.
Wow.
That's what that cow was eating. So what does that have to do with even an organic, a cow that's organically reared here in the UK that's got three types of grass if it's lucky? That milk is going to be unutterably different, and the health and vitality of the cow will be unutterably different.
Yeah, so interesting. That whole thing of the animals just going to get what they need as well, and making those choices.
And that's really, that's at the heart, I think, of herbal medicine, is that, one of the, historically, we've become more and more deprived, I think is the right word. There's good sides to it, but monoculture in all its and the kind of orthodoxy of this, there is only one right way to do it, rather than an understanding that these things are complex and you actually need diversity and input from across a range. That applies to thinking as well as as well as nutrition.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, this idea of more kind of intuitive relating to plants, because this is something I've noticed in my time here in the woods, is that I will get drawn to certain plants at certain times in a quite mysterious way, almost as if they're sort of waving at me saying hello, and I'll suddenly become
I think
aware.
they do.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
become quite fascinated by something. And if it's something I don't know, I'll go home and look it up. And but there's definitely, it's very, very subtle. But there's something about the noticing that that goes deeper than just, oh, that's interesting. It's a kind of communication almost. Well, I mean,
It's
you will probably have a lot more experience of this and depth of knowledge on it, but it's definitely something I've noticed. And sometimes I've followed it up if I've known that this thing is edible or at least won't poison me. And even then, I'll always taste something just to see what my body says,
yes,
because
yes,
our
absolutely.
bodies know, don't they? You put a little bit of something, it's not going to kill you, but your body will say, no, absolutely not. Or, that's interesting. Or, yeah, yeah.
Um, so the way I think about it is that, well, firstly, you need some peace and some silence, or at least quiet. It doesn't have to be silent, but so that you can be receptive, because it's about being receptive with your heart rather than with your intellect.
Sure.
And it's a bit like, the way I make sense of it is, it's a bit like music. Can we actually explain why we feel the way we do when we listen to some music that moves us? It's very, very difficult. You hear it, but it isn't just what you hear, it's how your heart and your mind respond to it. And that kind of hearing of plants, I think, is completely real. And I have a curious machine which is called the music of the plants, and there's this, I don't know very much about it, but this extraordinary alternative research community in Italy called Damanhurt, in the north of Italy, and they specialize in research in communication with plants. And this particular machine has a synthesizer, and you can connect it. You put one pole in the earth and another on a leaf, and it actually it creates, the plant is able to make music. And I mean, sometimes it's just going up and down the scales, but there was one time a couple of years ago, I have a beautiful quince tree in my garden, and it was a perfect spring day, and the quince was in flower, and with 3 friends we sat down and we tried it, and the music, it was out of this world. It was, it's very difficult to describe it, but at the end, one friend who plays the violin and loves music said that is the most incredible concert I've ever heard in my life.
Oh,
And another friend said the world's never going to be the same again. And as I understand it, these researchers in Damanhur in North Italy have actually, they are moving on to getting equipment that will actually enable some kind of communication on a more verbal level. And so I'm told by a colleague who's a herbalist who's been there, they actually have a they've got it's a tree in a pot next to a door, and they have it wired up. The door is locked electronically, and the tree recognizes who can go in and unlocks the door for them.
really?
Yeah.
Wow. That's amazing. I mean,
So, and
well,
then, going in different ways, I'm sure you've come across that thing, which I'm a little bit cynical about, right? Forest bathing, you know,
yeah, yeah,
I know what they're talking about, but we don't have to dress it up.
exactly. It's
It's
more the marketing that's ridiculous.
exactly,
Everybody
yeah,
knows it's good for you to walk in the
yeah,
woods.
yeah.
It's just
And
obvious, right?
and again, it's there's that on this is on a different level. There must be some kind of communication going on on a kind of that we pick up that's not that at this point in time we're not aware of. But what we are aware of is the aerosols, but all the things that plants give out.
Mm.
So if you're walking through a pine forest, as you walk through, you are breathing the pine essential oils that are released. All the other compounds, complex, plants have thousands of different molecular compounds, and some of them are volatile and are released along with water and oxygen. And you're breathing those in, and they are actually, the essential oils go in through the nose, and the nose is the most ancient evolutionary part of the nervous system. So those molecules are actually going in to the nervous system, and physically connecting with the nervous system and creating a sense of smell and having an impact on our consciousness, although we may not be aware of it. So that's another way in which what communication, certainly unconscious interaction.
Sure. I mean that, yeah,
um,
the gut has, I guess the gut uses the taste and smell as its sort of input for its intelligence, which is very kind of intuitive and instinctive, and in my direct experience, and I believe people kind of have studied this, that it's so immediate as well, in a way that the mind could never hope to be that quick. The mind is very slow to register what's going on, whereas the gut, it knows instantly. Sometimes even before you get into a situation, you're receiving information about it in that way.
Absolutely. So,
And this is of course this is going on between all this life, that is basically woven together, even if it's not immediately apparent to the thinking mind. Just the obviousness of us all sharing the same air that's full of water. We're all made of water. There's so much communication going on the viral level, on the bacterial level, on the fungal level, all the time, isn't it? And even energetically, I always feel like, as I become more sensitive and as I spend more time in this environment, I can feel energetically differences and flavors of energy. And when I lie on the ground, for instance, it does feel like I'm being reset, that there's some sort of discharging of any kind of
yes, yeah,
blockage, or it's like
some
a
kind of
reset.
electromagnetic
Yes,
rebalancing.
yeah.
Yeah,
And then, of course, trees being huge beings in themselves, there's a very clear energetic feeling I get from being around trees. And different trees have different qualities and at different times, and obviously depending on how tuned in I am or distracted or in my head or not, the quality changes. But it's a tangible thing. It's something that can be experienced, as you say, if you quiet yourself down enough to be receptive, if you can yield in a way and open in that way, there's there's a lot going on, and and it does have a sort of mysterious quality as well because it's not intellectual, but
Well, it by definition, it's not intellectual
yeah,
because you have to suspend your intellect to be able to start to access that aspect of life, and that's one of the problems that we're all so uh, stuck into being in an intellectual mode. And don't get me wrong, you know, intellect's fantastic. It's wonderful. It's just the exclusivity with which we practice it.
in moderation. Yeah,
In balance, yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Because I wanted to say that you were saying about the way the gut understands. In many ways, our conscious mind is just a very thin sliver of a reality that we are largely unaware of. It's not a very happy example, but it's the one that made me realize it so powerfully. I was in Brazil a couple of years ago, and I got everyone who went for this meal, we got food poisoning, and it was truly astonishing because my body reacted violently,
Mm.
and there was the opposite of being in conscious control, but my body, my reflex, that if you like, the more the more base, the lower, more animal dimension of our beings, was in total control, and all the normal processes by which the gut works, the peristalsis moving from the mouth downwards, it was thrown into absolute and total reverse.
Mm.
And absolutely everything came back out the other way. And it was not remotely a conscious, there was not, I was probably trying to stop it because I didn't really
Exactly.
want to.
Yeah.
We all
The
know that.
mind gets
So,
completely pushed
so
aside in those moments.
that's right. And that is the reality that underpins our existence, that when we are simply living on the level of intellectual consciousness, we lose track of that base reality that underpins everything.
That brings up something really intriguing for me, which is I've begun to suspect that when we have really kind of intense illnesses that have fevers as part of them, those kind of like you would with a flu, a really kind of bad flu, there's this, it almost seems to me like it's the body's way of resetting the mind or our thinking habits because maybe, or upgrading or updating, almost like a software update or forcing an update on the mind or the thinking process because maybe we've thought ourselves into a dead end that's making us unhealthy or a kind of a set of habits. And it seems to me, I'd be fascinated to hear what you think about this, that it's like the body is going, okay, we've got to sort the head out. The head is making a lot of problems for us. This is how we do it. We'll get a flu. We'll take that virus. We'll let it in. We'll ramp up the temperature. We'll cook our brains, and all the hallucinating or the visions or the delirium are a part of it because in direct experience in my life, the times I've had those really intense fevers, I've come out of them as a different person with a
Absolutely.
different view on my life. In some way, something about me has changed, like a death rebirth almost.
Yeah, no, I recognize, I think, very much what you're talking about, and that often acute illness like that is both physically cleansing because you're sweating, you're eliminating in a range of ways, and it's also spiritually cleansing, and as you said, the resetting. Um, and I absolutely believe that in a lot of cases, illness can be seen as a very, particularly acute illness that you recover from, can be seen as having a positive dimension to it, and it's sad that it isn't recognized more. But I do want to say the reverse too. The illness is illness, and you don't really want to wish yourself or anyone else onto illness for that kind of so there's a paradox there, or a dichotomy, that on the one hand we don't want to be ill, but on the other hand, when it happens, let it be one that involves that growth and resetting to what I think is usually a higher level.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's like a rite of passage or something, isn't it? It's like a kind of enforced or physically enforced rite of passage. Um, yeah. So talk a bit about the difference then between those very acute, distinct illnesses that often can come and go quite quickly, relatively, and then the more sort of long term, sort of lingering conditions that I don't know. Maybe you get to deal with more in your work. Is that fair to say?
It's not that herbal medicine can be brilliant for acute problems, but yeah, 90% of people I treat have chronic health problems. And the way that I classically talk about it is that if you look back, the simple one is to go back to North America in the 18th and 19th centuries. And North Americans at that point learnt unimaginable amounts of about illness and medicinal plants from Native Americans. And an example that we all know about now is Echinacea. And Echinacea, one of its traditional names is Indian snake fruit, because many times snakes that have either bitten themselves or been bitten will try and find an Echinacea plant and wrap themselves around it and extract the sap, so that the sap goes into the site of the wound and it works as an anti-venom and antitoxin.
Right.
And many, this relates back to what we were talking about earlier, that many plants are actually, their medicinal virtues traditionally have been discovered perhaps mostly by observing animals. But anyway, that North American traditional herbal medicine in the 18th, 19th centuries was about people out in the frontiers, out in the wilds, getting acute illness, having serious accidents. It wasn't about all the diseases of civilization, although obviously TB, but TB is more again a disease of cities. So it was about treating acute problems with encouraging vomiting, emetics, increasing sweating. So chili and lobelia were classically used. Lobelia that makes you vomit, but it relaxes the body. Chili puts fire into the system, will help the body to produce a higher fever and burn off the problem more quickly. And so all those problems where you would expect people they were either going to die if it was really, really serious, or they were going to come out and probably be potentially healthier than they were at the outset. And certainly after that, a period of convalescence. But if you move to where, and I would say that the two very healthiest people I ever met in my entire life as a herbalist, interestingly, they were both born in the inland in Jamaica, in the bush. and they grew up. One of them, when I met him, he was about 85, um, and he lived in the bush until he was 21, having nothing but the fish that they could get from the river, and animals that were that either, you know, chickens obviously, and animals that were hunted, vegetables grown in the in plots and from the bush, no pollution. And he was 85, and the only thing wrong with him was that he, you know, he walked around everywhere as if he was a, not exactly a 25-year-old, but he was springing around, and he just had his digestive fire was a bit weak. And then I had another man who was also born in a similar situation, and he was 70 when I saw him, and I got him on the couch examining him, and Jamaicans always call herbalist doc, so he was going, well, doc, and he was throwing his hands around in with this vitality, and I thought to myself, I have not seen that vitality in a 17-year-old, let alone in a 70-year-old, for, you know, since when? And you know, it's not a happy thought. But firstly, the lifestyles that we lead, you know, sitting is the most unnatural thing to do. It's not what we're supposed to do as a species, by and large. A little bit fine round the fireside or whatever, but you know, we're supposed to be active, by and large. Yeah, and you can still think when you're active. You can go for a walk in the woods, and you could, and we are, of course, you know, we're subject to ever increasing complex levels of pollution as more and novel chemicals are developed, and so the our bodies, you know, combined with the immense achievements of medical science, antibiotics, steroids, that enable what were life-threatening conditions to be. So we forget about them. You know, in the First World War, garlic was shipped out to the trenches by the tons. It was the dressing, the antibiotic dressing for wounds, and it was effective, but it wasn't going to give you the guarantee against sepsis that modern antibiotics do. And you know, if you read books about wars or anywhere where people were subject to wounds, the number of people that would die, you could die from a minor little infection on the finger, because there wasn't. So I'm just saying that because I'm not trying to say that there aren't huge benefits, but the downside is that our bodies are becoming ever increasingly repositories for chemicals that our systems have no way of properly dealing with, and that affects our vitality and our vigor, and our ability to respond to illness and toxic assaults in a vital and acute way. So chronic responses involve a coldness that they lack the vitality that, you know, you look at young children and parents get so frightened, understandably, because a child that is perfectly healthy and normal at 12 o'clock, by 4 o'clock might have a fever of 40 degrees and be sweating and seriously unwell, but the next day they might well be perfectly fine again. But you never, you know, as one gets older, there's less tendency to get high fevers, because the vitality, in the same way we were talking about the body's reflexes, so the vomiting or whatever, the more toxic burden we have, the harder it is for the body to respond in that vigorous, life-affirming way.
So it's really the context of our lives is what determines our well-being or health. You know, the environment in which we're in, what we're eating, what we're doing, how we're being, how polluted that is. And those examples you were giving of the Jamaicans, because they were in that context of, relatively pristine environment, um, active,
Well,
probably
that
very
that's
physical.
that's an there are other interpretations, but that was the one that I thought was the most plausible.
I mean, it seems to me like, I mean, that seems kind of obvious to me, but obviously, it's not so widely accepted. But it does seem to me like the context is everything, and it's the thing which is overlooked constantly, or mostly by the sort of Western medical system. It's all about the symptoms. It's not about the causes. I mean, it's, that's a blanket statement. It's not completely true, but you know what I mean. There's this emphasis on dealing with the symptoms and just constantly dealing with the symptoms, and not saying, well, what's causing this? Why are we seeing all this illness? And it does seem, even now as I'm sitting, we're here on Zoom, I can feel how unhealthy this is in my body. I can feel how blocked my circulation is in my legs. And I've spent the afternoon mulching some comfrey beds I've got in the field, and I couldn't feel more different now than I did, an hour ago. And it's so obvious to me that that's healthy and that this isn't, or a small amount of this is fine. But if I was doing this all day every day, 5 days a week in a job, and getting all that electromagnetic
Mhm.
radiation from a screen or from devices, and being inside or surrounded by plastics, no wonder we're getting ill. No wonder we have all these mysterious illnesses that science can't understand. It's so obvious to me that it astounds me that it isn't more widely perceived as obvious. I don't know. What you're obviously, because you're much more plugged into the natural world in what you do. You're probably more in the middle of all of that, and you obviously you have more knowledge of the traditional scientific approach as well. But what do you make of that?
Um, I'm sorry, you're going to have to ask the question again. I've gone blank
Yeah,
now.
no, just, well, it's just, is do you think that the context of our lives is what
Right.
causes
Well, I
most of
think
our
that,
illness, I guess, is what I'm asking.
yeah. Well, I mean, the key word is adaptability or adaptation, the capacity to adapt. Um, so, uh, if you think of if one is in a perpetually stressful context, then the generally recognised response to chronic stressful environments and situations, where you get, first of all, you get a sympathetic response where you get an acute stress, and then over time, that if you don't get clear it, you then descend into a chronic stress state, and a chronic stress state has a far more damaging end results. It creates chronic inflammation, and as you will know, and this, everybody's out there, everybody talking about it, chronic inflammation on all sorts of different levels underpins almost all the severe chronic ill health problems that we're prone to, where there's cancer, late onset diabetes, cardiovascular problems, etc. There is one of the key factors underpinning it is chronic inflammatory conditions and the state within tissues, and chronic stress. That doesn't necessarily mean emotional stress, or that's part of it. It can mean physical stress. If you're permanently cold and exposed cold, that is equally a stress. But if you add it all up, electromagnetic stress, if you're working on a screen all the time, not sleeping properly, you add all those things, and then I like this, because then when we come back to each time, I'm coming back to this, I'm talking about me vomiting, but that's not a very nice, but we can maybe find a better example. But that bedrock of our beings, of our physical bodies, and the reflexes that are built into it, and the intelligence that it's got, and how it is being that its capacity to maintain and restore good health is being challenged on perhaps on ever wider scales, and from different directions, because so much of our our life now is without precedent in terms of past generations.
Well, it shows us just how remarkable we are as well, that we can subject ourselves to this intense
I must
and
say,
yeah, and still we're here and we are
there's a
adapting, and there is that element of a little bit of stress is actually healthy as well.
of course.
You need that kind of, it's exercise for our system, isn't it? It's when it's sustained, as you say, that it becomes chronic. And then, it's remarkable to me that we take as much stick as we do. And I think of people that I've known in my life who who've abused their bodies so, by themselves, never mind with their environment, so immensely, and still managed to live till they were 75 or something. It is remarkable.
There's not quite sure that he meant it quite in this context, but Dostoevsky, I can't remember which novel it is, he says rhetorically, is there nothing that human beings can't adapt to? And he was saying that on a moral level, I think,
Yeah,
but it equally applies on a physiological level.
yeah, yeah. So what is the role of the herbs then in all of this as a kind of ally with, because we are under so much stress and attack and self-harm and whatever. Where does that fit in? And maybe perhaps talk a little bit about how you came to be in this world. What I don't mean actually about
No,
your
I
parents,
understand.
but yeah. How did you find your way into herbal
Well,
medicine?
I'm going to answer the first question first, which was
Okay.
there's a lovely quote, which is, I think it goes back to Aeschylus, who was the Greek god of healing, and it's first the word, then the herb, lastly the knife.
Mm.
So actually, discussion, talking, sharing, witnessing, unburdening
Mm.
with friends, with practitioners, that is an implicit and integral part of maintaining health, both on an emotional and nervous level and on a physical level. And that probably is not in the long term, but it's certainly at least as important as what you eat. It's probably much more important than what you eat, because our capacity to survive on next to nothing, you look at people who've been in concentration camps, etc., is truly remarkable. So then if you go from the word and that hasn't worked, then the herbs and spices, it's a nice easy way to think about it is like a spice. When you use spices in cooking, the volume you use is small, and it has a particular role. It's going to give a flavor, it's going to enhance your appreciation of what you're eating, and that you may not be aware of it. All the spices have significant medicinal activity in it, many of them working on the gut, so relieving spasm or colic, promoting digestive secretions, so on and so forth. And they have if you take them in consistently, they can have substantial, long-lasting health benefits. And I'd rather put it in terms of health benefits rather than treating illness, because exactly as we were talking about earlier, the aim of natural medicine is to maintain health and to avoid illness as far as that can happen. Obviously, it's there in the world we live in. If you suddenly have a car accident or you get acutely and seriously ill, probably I don't want you to come and see me. I want you to go to the place that is set up to deal with that. But on the other hand, I've been in China many years ago. I went to a hospital where they saw, it was a traditional medicine hospital. They saw 2 million patients a year there. I saw people queuing up like in a bank to collect their prescriptions. And you can have health services where herbal medicine, other natural approaches are absolutely integrated and form an essential part of treatment of serious life-threatening health problems. But we don't have that in this country. But so most of the time, herbs are working more to underpin and support the body to move to a higher state of balance and harmony. And there is a sort of hierarchy of illnesses. So a cold, we all know that you might, if you get a shock or if you drink too much and you get a hangover, at that point you're more likely to come down with a cold. So in a sense, you've created the opening. And then there are further openings, and the body is always seeking to re-establish that higher level in terms of the hierarchy of illness. And what herbs will do, if you use them correctly, is help to support the body in that process. And by and large, herbs don't overrule the body. They work to provide the building blocks that the body's own processes require in order to get healthy.
It's interesting, the whole thing of eating herbs and spices and flavoring and taste, and thinking of that in that slightly different way as you speak there. I'm realizing, so eating, it's not about giving us energy, because actually not so much, because most of our energy I think we get from breathing, and maybe it's about some building blocks for our bodies, but it's the medication and the maintaining of the system, and this idea that things taste good because your body needs them right now to maintain the balance. That's a really interesting way of kind of looking at why and how we eat certain things, and why certain herbs have been brought into recipes, or that makes a lot of sense to me. And I really like this idea of the three, first the word, then the herb, then the knife. The speaking, the care of people, the emotional support, the discussion, the sharing, the unburdening of problems, that psychological, emotional aspect of health, to deal with that first. There's so much wisdom in that, and wouldn't it be wonderful? I'm sure you dream of this, because I certainly do. Having a balanced healthcare system that was, the premise of it was maintaining well-being first of all, and then only in those extreme circumstances where it's all gone wrong do we have these more extreme interventions, and that's where it seems that's the appropriate place for surgery, or maybe the drugs are more down that end, and things are really extreme, and you need to just get in there and do some kind of quite intense immediate work. But it's a small part of the overall healthcare, right? It's
Well,
in a way.
the problem is that the healthcare systems that are in the world, by and large, are geared to wait until symptoms arise, rather than to create a context in which things can be structured so that the symptoms don't need to arise. I mean, I'm not trying to push China at all, but I understand that 4-year-olds in China, I maybe this has changed, but certainly it was true. 4-year-olds in China get taught little bits of Tui Na, which is Chinese massage, and acupressure points. So if you have a headache, you press this point, and you got this point on your ear. So there's nothing, you know, that might not be acceptable in the West, but at the very least, encouraging people to recognize that they can have an impact on their own health and take a certain measure of responsibility. Yeah. And one of the paradoxes of the National Health Service is that it has actually unintentionally, perhaps, but to a large part, but maybe intentionally to some part, it has stripped people of having to take responsibility for their health.
God, that's so true. I mean, that's kind of like the disease at the heart of our health service, isn't it? It's exactly that. It's to just, oh, I can do whatever I want because I'll go and get fixed. No responsibility.
And I just there's just that it's awful, but it's also very, very funny. You know, statins are prescribed very widely for to help raise blood fat levels, cholesterol, and so on. And there was this study in California about 10 years ago, and they took these older patients and they did all their blood measurements, and they were there as volunteers, and they gave them the statins. Just they wanted to see what would happen with the blood profiles. And they couldn't believe it. After 3 or 4 months, they found that their blood fat profiles had actually deteriorated. And this carried on, and they couldn't work out why this was happening. And they finally worked out that the people who'd been given the statins had interpreted them as if it made them kind of immortal. And they actually, instead of changing their diets for the better, they actually ate even more junk food and had a worse diet and had an even worse profile. So
yeah, that's it. It's and that thing of the kids kind of being shown that they can actually take some responsibility, that they have some control over it, and even noticing their own body and becoming familiar with it, and making that connection, like of consciously intervening. That's such a powerful thing, isn't it? And especially at that age, to kind of get that in there early, that sense of your.
And you know, if you think about traditional societies, you know, that it would have, you know, in terms of domestic medicine rather than kind of formal trained herbal medicine, domestic herbal medicine, it would have been the grandmothers who would principally, grandfathers too, but mostly grandmothers, who would have known what to do for a situation. And the children would have seen their grandmother preparing medicines on the hearth, picking things. They would have been explicitly exposed to it, and would have taken the herbs, and it would have been an integral part of their learning about life and how to survive.
Yeah, that observation and growing up around it, playing around life being lived, and seeing and experiencing and unconsciously picking it up.
So one of the, you know, I think that certainly for me, you know, although I've been involved in the professional development of herbal medicine, I also have there's a part of me that has a hostility towards professions. George Bernard Shaw's famous saying is that a profession is a conspiracy visited upon the laity. And he never pulled his punches. The thing is that with the best one in the world, professions are self-serving.
Mm.
not necessarily out of any conspiracy theory, but because, if you go to a surgeon for advice, the surgeon is going to say, well, actually, we need to do this operation. And if you go to an osteopath will say, well, that this manipulation is really what is going to be most helpful for you. And obviously, if you go to a herbalist, the herbalist is going to say, so,
I get it.
see what
Yeah,
I'm saying.
that's a very interesting point to raise. Yeah, so true as well. And inevitably there comes a bit of self-righteousness with that as well,
Yeah.
and all the all the trappings of the professional life. So, yeah, that's a very difficult one to.
So the only way out of that is professional humility.
Right.
And there are shining examples of people who are like that, but unfortunately, most people, success goes to their heads.
Yeah. Right. Right. But no, like you say though, and it only takes a few shining examples. Those lights are quite bright, aren't they? And they do reach a lot of people. But even that in itself, that's part of the personal journey of that particular practitioner, isn't it? That they've gone that far, that they've seen through the other side of that, the kind of ego trap and the status and self-esteem, and that there's a kind of return to that humble understanding and the greater sort of understanding of how mysterious it actually all is. And we don't
Absolutely,
know that
yes.
much
And
really,
we don't know that.
if we know anything.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean that brings me to that idea of instinct and intuition, and what was that somehow involved in you choosing this as your path? Did you have kind of experiences
Yeah.
that sort of triggered that, or
Well,
yeah?
I mean, the thing that actually got me into herbal medicine that was that I had a viral infection. I was really ill. I think I had mumps, but my doctor said no, I didn't. Anyway, my doctor wanted to give me antibiotics, and I knew that being a viral infection, it wasn't going to do anything for me, and I'd never been particularly keen on having medication unless I really needed it. So I had a high fever, and I instinctively, in the same way that we were talking about animals earlier, I think actually we have it, but we just don't know we have it. I drank lots of tonic water, I drank chamomile tea, and I ate lots of garlic, and that really helped me. And obviously, as my studies continued, I started to discover that tonic water has quinine in it, and quinine comes from Peruvian bark, and quinine were the main treatments for 300 years for malaria. Still forms the basis of lots of conventional medicines that are used. Very powerful effect for the immune support, antibiotic effect, and on the liver, and it lowers temperature. Chamomile, people think that chamomile is just a nice, simple cup of tea, but it's an amazingly potent plant. It's got huge activity against Staphylococcus aureus. It has a range of benefits for the gut, and it helps to relax and open up the body so that it's able to detoxify more efficiently. And then lastly, garlic. Well, I think there have been well over 1,500 research papers on garlic, and we could probably spend all day talking about its therapeutic activity. It's truly astonishing, but it's antiviral. It's diaphoretic, makes you sweat, so helps lower fever. It's a natural antibiotic. It lowers blood pressure. It has an antiseptic effect within the chest because the garlic oil is eliminated through the lungs. That's why you get the smell on the breath.
Okay.
You could try this out. If you cut a clove of garlic and rub it on the sole of your foot, you will smell garlic in your breath within about 2 seconds.
Really?
So it gets absorbed through you can put it on your palm.
Yeah.
Um, it, it will be absorbed, it'll be carried through the bloodstream, it will get to the lungs, and the oil will start to be eliminated out through the lungs within a couple of seconds, and you will smell it. And it's antibiotic. It's got sulfur compounds, which are natural antibiotics, so it helps to disinfect and counter infection within the chest. So for bronchitis, etc.
Yeah. So I've heard of like remedies, especially I had some friends when I was in London who were from Serbia, and they were always telling me about these kind of old folk remedies for various illnesses. And a lot of those were to do with putting things on your feet, like putting them in your socks and just walking on them all day.
Yeah,
What
yeah,
is it about then the palms as well, you're saying? So soles of your feet and the palms of your hand, they seem to be kind of
yeah.
receptive areas. Why is
So
that?
when you take a medicine or you take something through your mouth, it gets absorbed across the gut wall into the body, into the bloodstream, and then it goes to the liver. It goes first to the liver, and the liver processes, it metabolizes whatever comes to it. So most drugs become, some drugs actually get metabolized and become more active, but most drugs become less effective. So if you can actually get something to bypass the liver, you have a more effective and medicine, and you can use a lower dose. And in fact, there's a tradition in France, a very famous 20th century herbalist called Maurice Masseguet, who his father and they basically only used hand and foot baths. That's all they did,
Right.
because the degree of absorption through, their surfaces where we sweat, you've
Yeah.
got lots and lots of pores, so it's very easy for the tissue, for the uptake of nutrients and medicinal compounds through the pores directly into the bloodstream.
And energetically, there's a lot, well, energetically and perhaps in terms of the nervous system, are there a lot of nerve endings in those places? And I feel like there's,
Yeah, there are. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, I practice Aikido, which is a martial art, so I've
Mhm.
become very aware and attuned to the ki, as the Japanese call it, the chi, Chinese. We don't even have it for some reason in our medical system. But this energy, this life force in the body, which is palpable, tangible, you can feel it once you kind of start learning to notice it.
Mhm.
But there's definitely a lot going on in the hands with that, and in terms of the way it flows, and probably the feet too, which I'm further away from my feet and maybe less in tune, but there's definitely a feeling that those places are important, either kind of nodes or there's some sort of interface, between the body and the external energy maybe in the field around us. I don't know.
There's a there's a fairly grotesque drawing that has been done that presents the human body in terms of the density of nerve endings. So the lips are huge, and the hands and the feet are huge, and areas of the thorax are very small,
Right.
and likewise of the thighs. So it's head and hands and feet more than anywhere else.
Right, interesting. Yeah, it's this much more holistic view of health that they seem to have in the East, that we somehow, it relates to our kind of obsession with thinking, doesn't it? And something happened as as we kind of evolved in Northern Europe. I don't know what it was, but we went up into our heads quite severely. But this kind of balanced experience of the human body and mind and heart and all of it. Do you see a kind of coming back to that now culturally? Because in your lifetime, what was called alternative or holistic medicine, it's definitely established itself, wouldn't you say, or not? I don't know.
Um,
Or was there already or a continuous sort
There's
of
been
tradition?
there's been what we might call alternative or complementary medicine for 150 years. You know, the National Institute of Medical Herbalists.
Right,
Um, it it was founded in 1864,
right.
and it was founded because the medical profession at that time uh, wanted to have a bill which made only medically qualified practitioners to have the legal capacity to practice medicine,
Mm.
and that was voted down in the House of Commons by a huge concerted campaign across the country, and uh, so I hope we have to be we have to hold on to the positive that firstly that strain of thinking and that we're talking about and living, it's there and it's getting more profile. But I have to tell you this one. At one point when I was working at Middlesex University as a lecturer in herbal medicine, I was involved in trying to set up a new training clinic for the students, and we were hoping we could get a training clinic in a London hospital, and it was not. It sort of happened, but it didn't. Is the answer. There was a fudge, but I went to one major teaching hospital in London, and we met the medical director, who was he was a very nice man, and he said that, you know, if it was up to me, I would have no hesitation. I think this would be excellent. I think it would challenge our medical students and the medics here, and it would force you to have to confront, you know, the discipline and the rigor that mainstream medicine involves.
Mm.
He didn't quite, so I'm just adding that in, but
Yeah,
that
sure.
was what he was implying. He said, I would like it. He said, but I can assure you that the consultants in this hospital would rather have a stand in the in the foyer of the hospital selling cigarettes than have a herbal clinic in this hospital.
Yeah.
And the Anglo-American, in fact, I think the English, the British medical profession is probably the most hostile medical profession to herbal medicine possibly in the world. You know, Germany, 90% of German doctors prescribe herbal medicines routinely. Actual herbal medicines are used in hospitals routinely. In the US, because of its crazy health system, there are openings for greater variety. You know, you can osteopaths and chiropractors and naturopaths are recognized as doctors in the US, so there's actual scope in a way that it isn't just to do with the kind of the National Health Service and this vast monoblock thinking that is involved. It's also the medicine and medicine production is a very important and integral part of the British economy.
Do you think that's what underlies all of that then? The financial pressure?
You know, that the economy always speaks. You know, that's the one of the fundamental laws of life, and probably it should. But again, I went to a university to discuss setting up a herbal medicine degree, and the deputy vice chancellor had been at another university previously, and when we met up, he said, well, if I'd been at this previous university, I wouldn't have replied to you at all. We would never have met up because we received so much funding from the pharmaceutical industry that was in the same town that we're based, that we wouldn't have even considered it.
Mm. Conflict of interest. I mean,
So I don't
yeah.
believe in conspiracy theories by and large, but yeah,
The blind force of profit. I think it doesn't need to be conspiracy
profit
theory.
and you know
Well, do you think there's something
we
else about the English medical system that also, not just that, is it some kind of flashback to the kind of witches or the pagan, suppressing the pagan
well I think that
religion? What do you
we've
think?
got to differentiate. I mean, there's all sorts of different. If we were talking about herbalists as herbalists, and I include myself in this, we're not an orthodox bunch. We're all over the place, and we all have different views and different perspectives, and the medical profession is very clear about establishing an orthodoxy, and there's tremendous value and strength to be gained from that, because there's at least apparent unity. There isn't a unity. There's all sorts of endless fights that go on but in herbal medicine there is no actual unity, because there isn't. Well, in traditional Chinese medicine perhaps there is, but that's a slightly different case. What we have are lots, the sort of summation of lots of different potentially conflicting ideas. So there isn't or one, this is right and this is the fact, and there's no argument with it.
And that's also because you're dealing with intuitive
It's because
experiences, and everybody
it
is different, and every
absolutely,
and
and also
pharmaceuticals are very black and white, right? It's like
exactly,
one
and that's
stage
why,
at a time.
and that makes them very attractive on an intellectual level,
Yeah.
because they are designed to be effective across the board, although most drugs, they only have to be effective at, let's say, 50% of cases, and there is never discussion about what happens to those 50% or 40% where it isn't effective, or where there are side effects. So there is a kind of mental sleight of hand involved there. And the thing about herbs is that if they're used sensibly and correctly, the chances of side effects are absolutely minimal. They are very, very unusual. And the worst thing would be you might get a slight headache, or you might get some diarrhea, or and then the minute you stop, end of problem.
Well,
So
they've been tested for millions of years, right?
yeah,
By millions of people. So there's that kind of,
people have said that it's the longest clinical trial ever run. Exactly.
which is totally makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, it is. We wouldn't be here if those things were, had long-term damaging effects on us. We'd have, or those things would have worked themselves out long ago. Yeah. It's more of a view, isn't it? It's a different worldview, a different perspective.
It's and I think that has always been present
Mm.
in all societies, that there are those people who tend to veer towards what we can call the holistic, the unified vision, where we where the parts are integrated in the whole, and then there are those who veer towards an analytical view, where they make sense of the world by actually breaking things down and seeing how they fit together.
Yeah, it's like a left brain, right brain
Mm-hmm.
dominance
Yeah.
showing itself in the population, I guess. So where's the harmony then? Where's the kind of the sweet spot? Have you found that, do you think, in your working life?
Well, I'm
Yeah, I
you know,
guess always.
I think that that the only way the only way that we will find a way out of the impasses that we're in is through spiritual change of heart.
Mm.
um, and until and unfortunately, if you look at history, most spiritual changes of heart happen once things get really bad.
After the event.
So I'm not a pessimist. I'm an optimist,
Mm.
but I think this is what I think about global warming. I don't, my skepticism says that the changes are not that we're all willing to make are not enough on their own. Maybe there will be technical advances that will make a big difference, but ultimately, in terms of the planet, our life on the planet, we're not going to change until we have a new spiritual values, because it's the values that finally count. And if we make profit and finance as the only dominant values, then we're never going to find a way out of the impasse that we're in.
Sure. I mean, that's the sort of machine reality that we're moving towards rapidly. But then there's this, I have a real sense that there's a kind of a remembrance or a calling for that connection with the land again.
Yes,
Because
and
I mean, it's been my
I
lived
think
experience, and I think I see more and more people, because it's so obviously the answer to all our ills. I
and
would put that as the main reason we're in the mess we're in, is because we lost our connection with the land, with
yeah,
place where we live.
and in that sense, that's what we need to be really positive and affirmative about, is that people just get on and live as best they can good lives that are in, as far as possible, in harmony with the earth and with our fellow beings.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, amen to that. I've got, so that feels like maybe a good point to stop it, but I've got a question I've just noticed out of the corner of my eye. The Chinese lanterns my neighbor gave me have that
Mhm.
amazing seed in the middle. Is there any medicinal use, or do you know anything about that particular plant? No.
Oh, those ones. No,
Yeah, these.
well, they are.
Do you know the plant? It has
Yeah, I
this
do. Yeah,
bright
yeah,
orange
sure,
berry
yeah,
in the middle.
yeah. The That's a very close relative to Withania somniferum or ashwagandha.
Oh, is
Um,
it?
yeah, and it's the roots that are used mostly in Withania, which is a brilliant adaptogen. It uh, supports vitality and endurance, and it helps to calm and reduce anxiety and nervousness, and supports sleep. And you can use the berries as well, and they have the same structure as, but I'm not sure that you can. I think that I don't know that the
Right,
Chinese lanterns might be potentially toxic, because obviously it's the deadly nightshade family.
right. It's interesting you say all that though, because they have been sort of, they were kind of speaking to me a little bit in the last couple of days, and my daughter was very taken with them. I mean, they're beautiful as well. They're absolutely beautiful things. But yeah, great. Well, thank you so much for coming on the journey. I enjoyed.
Well, thank you very much, Tim. We've covered a lot of ground.
Yeah, we got a little bit done there, but yeah, great. Thanks for that, and take care.
Good, and you.
Bye.